Thank you very much, Andy. Well, I hope everybody can see me and hear me all right. So first of all, thank you for having me. I'm truly delighted to be with you over here. As Andy said, I have a lovely reason. The doctor said that everything is fine, but I should be around to make sure that everything goes all right. To which I said, yeah, no problem. I'll be around. Not quite sure on what I should be to make sure that everything goes all right. But if there's any moment in which we have to jump into the car and go, I'm here. I'm ready. The rest, I hope nature takes care of itself. Great privilege, really, to be here. It's a great topic that we're going to look into. We're going to start with trying to understand what psychological safety is really about, and then we're going to try to understand how can we pass something as important as psychological safety onto the next generations. Okay, so these are the two ideas that we're going to look into. I'm going to use a few slides, not too many. Don't want to kill people by PowerPoint, but there are a few concepts that we need to look into. The first one, I would start by trying to understand what psychological safety is all about. Psychological safety is a belief that I have about the quality of the environment in which I find myself to be, which means basically I am convinced that the environment in which I am, the situation in which I am, it's a situation where I can express myself. I can speak my mind, I can share my opinions. Fundamentally, I can be myself in a responsible way, but it's okay for me to share information, to make mistakes, to speak my mind, and so forth and so on. Now, why is psychological safety very important for human beings? Because that's where you move up onto the slide. Psychological safety is the biggest contributor of our psychological well-being. Psychological well-being is how do I feel internally? So psychological safety is a belief that I have about the environment around me. Psychological well-being is how I feel about my internal state. So that is a very interesting correspondence because that tells us that the quality that I experience of the environment around me plays a huge role about how I feel internally. Okay, so psychological well-being is my experience of what goes on in my emotions. And then if you move up again in the slide, you see mental health. Okay, mental health is a condition like physical health. I can be well, I can be unwell, physically and mentally, and oftentimes they obviously go together. In our profession, oftentimes we see organizations and leaders of organizations that they want to take care of people's mental health. I'd like my people, my employee to be mentally well. If you are in that situation, if you are a manager of people, I would like to invite you to consider that one of the best things you can do is to focus on psychological safety. The factors of mental health are many, 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 and they're very different. You know, personal life matters, physical health. These are all factors that play a role on mental health. And as a leader of an organization or as a manager of people, the best way to contribute to your employees' mental health, the access that you have is the one of working on your organizational environment, trying to create a psychologically safe environment. That's an excellent way to contribute to people's psychological well-being and therefore their mental health. By the way, psychological safety is a prerequisite for a whole bunch of things that you see here in the slide, okay? It's not something that is an optional. It's not a luxury. Human beings, they need psychological safety as much as they need food and water in order to grow and to thrive psychologically. One thing to consider is that the quality of your life and my life fundamentally depends on what goes on with us inside of our heads, okay? If we are suffering from chronic stress, an excessive amount of pressure, if we are experiencing on an ongoing basis negative emotions, our body-mind system collapses. Okay, so psychological safety is a prerequisite for my overall health, is a prerequisite for my social life. Okay, meaning that my relationships and my psychological health are in a symbiotic link. And by the way, if you are interested in improving the performance of your organization, you should know that psychological safety is the number one ingredient of boosting organizational performance. There are a lot of studies that have been going on for the past 2 decades, I would say, around the correlation between psychological safety and performance. Okay, and this is on the slide, you see just the most famous one, which is the Google Aristotle project. But there are many studies, if you look into the literature, that now they underline that the correlation between psychological safety and performance is very high, which tells us something which is kind of very simple to understand, but sometimes we still struggle to digest, which is the notion that human beings, they perform at their best when they feel safe, when they feel that they are operating inside of a collaborative environment, and when they feel that they can express their opinions, and when they think that there's not going to be any negative repercussion or any unfair repercussion if they admit a mistake. Now, this is something that sounds quite trivial because it makes immediate sense when you speak about it, but it's still a notion which is quite new in the business. If you're, I used to be young. I've been in business for more or less the past 30 years. And this notion that if you want to be effective to manage people, you need to truly create qualitative relationships with them. You need to work on how they perceive the quality of their environment. You need to create the opportunity for them to be honest about delays and mistakes. All of that is something which is still pretty new into the world of business management. You heard earlier on Steve in his very intense and touching presentation speaking about the importance of speaking up. And if you're interested in safety, you all know that creating a speak-up culture is one of the most important things you can do. Now, here's the thing, though. You can't really ask people to speak up unless you provide them with an environment where it's easy for them to do so. Meaning, if you are asking people to speak up in your organization, but you are not creating an environment that makes it easy, basically you're asking them to sacrifice themselves, to be a hero. Okay, I'll speak up, but I know I'm going to pay the consequences for it. Now, people, every now and then, they can be heroes, but in the long run, it's tiring and it's painful to be a hero. So you begin to see, I hope, the notion that creating a psychologically safe environment is step number one for any truly desirable cultural change in an organization. It could be a cultural change toward a better safety culture, could be a cultural change towards a better level of performance. Creating the environment that allows for people to experience psychological safety is the number one ingredient to do that. Very last piece about this notion of psychological safety. If what I've said so far sounds a little bit too abstract and theoretical, if you want to have a straightforward, direct experience of the impact of psychological safety, try to go back walk back into your memory, take a walk in memory lane, and try to remember how you felt when you had to tell your parents that you took a bad grade in school. Or if you are a parent today, and try to remember how easy was it for your children to pass a test a math test or any test at school when they knew that the result was very important for them. And when they knew that they couldn't make a mistake, because otherwise you would get angry, or the teachers in school would get angry. You can immediately see, if you look at this simple example, that psychological safety is a necessary ingredient for our brains to work properly. If our brains don't work properly because we perceive a threat, as Andy was saying before, if we perceive fear, then our brains, they stop exercising the executive functions, meaning all these beautiful things that we can do with our prefrontal cortex, such as thinking, such as analyzing, such as learning from mistakes. All of these beautiful functions, which are the very, very top of our species, they get inhibited by fear. So if somehow you don't create a psychologically safe environment, people will have to find ways to think, to analyze, to be themselves, despite that ongoing threat that they feel at a psychological level. Okay, the best thing that parents can do, I sometimes do training sessions for parents, the best thing that parents can do for their children is to provide them an environment where it is okay for them to learn. They have the right to make mistakes and learn from them. Now, I don't want to sound patronizing, but that's the same thing in organizations. If we manage to create an environment of psychological safety, then we are creating the preconditions for people to perform at their best. And from a safety perspective, that means for people to do what it takes to keep each other safe. So that's the first piece, trying to understand what psychological safety is about and why it is important. In the domain of safety, I would say that psychological safety is the number one ingredient, not simply in terms of importance, but also in terms of chronological order. If you want to create a safety culture, begin by creating a psychological safe environment. Then everything else will be built on that. Okay, I hope that was clear enough. I'd like to move now on to the next topic, which is this notion of transferring knowledge from one generation to the other, to the next one. And as it was said but at the beginning of this conference, if you look at your organization, probably you have 3-4 different generations altogether. But for the sake of the rest of this conversation, I'm just going to speak at the opposite spectrum of the generational gap, meaning I'm going to speak about the older generation and the younger generation. And in the middle, there are many different characters. So the first thing I would say is you shouldn't really worry at all about the possibility of transferring knowledge to the next generations, because that will happen. Human beings are designed by nature to build on the knowledge of previous generations. I'm not saying to build on the wisdom of previous generations, okay? Because we're becoming more and more technologically advanced. We're not necessarily becoming more and more wise, okay? But let's say that these mechanisms, which has to do with us learning from our ancestors, from the previous generations, it's something which is embedded in our brains, okay? It's part of the growing up that we do when we're kids as individuals, and as groups and as societies, we do the same. So if you have any concern about will we be able to transfer our knowledge to the following generations, don't worry about that. That's done. That's taken care by nature, okay? Because otherwise it would mean that every new generation would have to reinvent fire, the wheel, electricity, etc., etc. We learn from past generations, not a problem. The question is, what do you want them to learn? And how do you want them to learn it? These are the real questions, because they will learn. okay, that you want them or not, they will learn. By they, I mean the younger generations. They will learn from you if you are part of the older generation. The question, once again, is how. You have two pictures here in the slides, which show two different ways, okay, two possible scenarios. The first one is a generational conflict. You don't need to go back in history books, but a typical example, which is still in some people's memory, is May 1968, the Cultural Revolution. Thousands and thousands of students in Europe, in the US, a little bit everywhere, protesting for the liberation of morality, for the younger generations to have more power, more decision-making power, to be listened to by the older generation. And that lasted for weeks, and it was quite violent. Typical example of a generational clash. The other picture shows you an interesting program that happens in at Pixar, where formally, every time that they onboard a new visual imaging expert, people that are drawing on tablets, basically, they are put together with a more senior person that is going to teach them the techniques of drawings. But at the same time, there is also a reverse mentoring, where the younger person teaches the older person some tricks about technology. So typical example, possibly, of mutual contribution. So again, trying to link these two concepts together. Coming from generations will learn from one another. Now, the question is, how is that going to happen? If you want the green scenario, the one where there is no conflict, then what you need to take care of, once again, is the topic that we were speaking about earlier, okay? You need to create the right environment inside of which this transgenerational contribution can happen. I'll speak in a moment about the notion itself of environment, but you can hear, once again, the ingredient that we're talking about is psychological safety. Okay, now, why is that? Well, because by nature, we do have some barriers, okay, to a constructive passing of the torch. I apologize for the simplification here. I don't mean that the older generations, they all look like grandpas, and the younger generations, they all look like robots. It's just images to simplify a concept. But, you know, if you've been 25 years, 35 years in the job, you tend to have a certain number of defense mechanisms in place about what you have learned, a certain amount of self-importance, a certain amount of, one might say, arrogance about your own experience, your own knowledge, your own right to be considered an expert in what you're doing. You've been doing that for 35 years, okay? 25. Now, if you are on the other side, if you are one of the younger members of the organization, well, you might have your own barriers. You might think that, you know, these guys in this company, they're so slow. You know, they're still sending emails to each other. I was speaking with John the other day, and he couldn't send me a file because he didn't know how to pass it on the Wi-Fi hotspot, hama, da-di-da-di-da. So you think that the world has always been communicating and working inside of this digital cloud in which we all live, and you might be very impatient. And you might not realize that the world has not always been working the way it does today. And even though technology has advanced, as I was saying earlier, there are some things which are in the domain of wisdom, which don't have to do with the digital world. They have to do with really being able to develop some distance from situations. They have to do with being able to putting into question your own decision-making process, things that you can learn from the previous generation, but your impatience or your arrogance, once again, might prevent you from doing. So what we're saying here is that each generation, we have natural barriers to the sharing of knowledge with each other, because we come from at least two different world views. which are at least partially shaped by the two different moments of life in which we find ourselves to be. If you are 55-year-old, you don't have the same worldview. You don't have the same set of beliefs that if you are 23, 25. And as human beings, we are always identified with our worldviews, which means that we're not like, I think it was Spock in Star Trek, which was completely emotionally detached from his opinion, hence always objective. But Spock was an alien. He was coming from a different planet. If you come from planet Earth and you have a bunch of opinions and beliefs, well, you are identified with them, meaning that you have an emotional attachment to your point of view. You have an emotional attachment to your opinion. You have an emotional attachment to the way in which you see things. Okay, therefore, it is difficult to be really, truly, sincerely open to the view of others, especially when the others are people that have been on the job for 6 months. The other way around, very difficult to be open-minded to receive someone else's contribution when that person can barely send an email. They don't even have posted anything on TikTok. They don't even know what TikTok is. And I am speaking about from experience here. So when you eliminate these barriers, then you begin to see that wisdom, which is the treasure of the previous elder generation, and innovation, which might be in this very simplistic view, might be the treasure of the new generations. One without the other, they don't cause evolution. Okay, wisdom without innovation, it's boring. Okay, it's lovely in books, in libraries, but it's boring like hell. Innovation without wisdom, you're gonna end up hurting yourself or making mistakes that were very much preventable. So then the question for the last few minutes is, what's the role of leaders in here? And the role of leaders is to facilitate an environment, okay? I would say, in general, the role of leadership is the one of facilitating the emergence of an environment, an atmosphere, if you want, a certain invisible mood, if you want to call it in a different way. Here's what I mean by environment. Thank God there are slides. So an environment is the space, both physical and psychological, that encompasses all the elements, influences, and contexts within which individuals and groups operate. It shapes perception, thoughts, emotions, everything. Okay? So let me tell you what I mean. Let me give you an example. Okay, if you see these pictures, okay, you see a young lady. If you're not familiar with this church behind it, this is the Florence Cathedral. Okay, beautiful example of Renaissance architecture in Florence. And there is this young lady that she's taking a selfie, I would assume. Okay, typical behavior of someone outside of a church. Okay, I'm taking this example because it belongs to my own culture, hoping I'm not offending anybody. Now, if you look at the second picture, let's pretend that the young lady is the same. I know she's not, but let's pretend, okay? Now, you see this person walking inside of supposedly the same cathedral. It's not the same cathedral. This is Gothic, this is Renaissance, but we don't care, okay? Just for the sake of the example. Now, what I'm trying to underline here is that, excuse me, if you find yourself to be a tourist outside of a cathedral, you will see that you will behave naturally and people around you will behave naturally in certain ways. Meaning you might take a selfie, you might talk loudly, you might wear not many clothes. If it's a hot summer in Italy, you might be drinking, eating, smoking, etc., playing football if you are a boy amongst other boys, etc., etc. Okay, that's outside the cathedral. Then you will notice that the moment in which you and other people step into the cathedral, your behaviors change immediately. The way you think changes, the way you speak changes, the tone of your voice, the volume of your voice, your demeanor, your overall perception of yourself and the environment around you changes. Okay, so that's what an environment is. An environment is the set of physical and psychological aspects that surround you. And the environment is the number one influencer of human behavior. If there is one concept, two, actually, the one is psychological safety. The number two concept that I truly would like to leave you with is this notion of the influence of the environment on human behavior. We can't control people. People don't do what we tell them to do. You know, if you have ever tried to get a human being to do what you want them to do, they'll do it for a little while, and then they end up doing it only if it makes sense for them. So human beings cannot be controlled, but they can be influenced. And I don't mean that in any negative way here, okay? And the number one influencer of human behavior is the environment inside of which people operate. And the environment is constituted by the physical elements. How easy do you make it for people to access the safety equipments, to follow the safety procedures, if you want to stick to the classic understanding of safety? And then the psychological ones, which are much more subtle. How easy do you make it for people to speak up? How easy do you make it for people which are new in the organization to learn from the older people in the organization? Have you created the opportunity to remove the barriers that we were speaking about here? Have you created programs where more experienced people are mentoring less experienced people and vice versa? Have you created digital mentoring program, for example? Have you created opportunities where you're mixing up teams so that the composition of these groups can benefit from one another? Are you working for an organization where it's easy for people to learn cross generations? All of that has to do with the environment. There are many examples of that compared to many decades ago where things are happening in that way. Google is one of them. Pixar is another one. But there are other organizations, probably your organization too. So to end up a little bit this conversation, we have natural barrier from learning from one another, but the process of learning will happen anyway. Can we create an environment that is going to take care of some of these barriers in order to create a psychological safety? Because if we do, sorry, let me just move a little bit quicker, okay, to this one. If we do, then you create a learning environment. A learning environment is an environment which is psychologically safe, hence is oriented toward improvement or performance. In that kind of environment, knowledge is perceived as a resource to be shared, and sharing knowledge and contributing feels natural and ethical. An unsupportive environment is still a learning environment. Please remember, okay, learning will happen. Doesn't matter if we want it or not. But what will people learn is going to be to self-preserve themselves, okay? They will learn to defend themselves. So knowledge is going to be used as a tool for defense, meaning I'm not going to share what I know because I don't feel safe. I feel that my job is threatened. I feel that if I share what I know, it's not going to be recognized anyway. Or sharing knowledge is used to invalidate others. Meaning your point of view, you're too young to understand. Or you will make that mistake because you're arrogant. So I'm going to use my knowledge and my wisdom to diminish you, rather than using my knowledge and wisdom to help you being successful. Okay, both behaviors are absolutely available for human beings, Actually, they're both natural for us. Which ones do we choose? Oftentimes depends on a psychological safe environment or not. If you want to create a psychological safe environment, here are the 5 themes, okay? We need to stay a little bit high level here, but here are the 5 themes which are useful to be aware of that need to be present in a place if you want to create psychological safety. Okay, now remember, psychological safety is about a belief. So these 5 elements, they are not necessarily something that people will find in tangible ways. Okay, it's more, are they experiencing the opportunity to collaborate? Are they experiencing that they are being treated fairly in the organization? Are they experiencing that the leaders are easy to be reached? They are open to contributions. Openness is about, am I easy to reach? Can people talk to me without fearing anything? That's openness. Is the organization transparent with me? Am I being told the truth about things? And then the last one, which in my view, in terms of safety, is the most important one, but also in terms of performance, is the acceptance of fallibility, demystifying, destigmatize mistakes, and demystifying performance at all cost. You and I probably, at least if you're my age, I'm 49, we grew up in an environment, in a culture which kind of mystifies performance. We need to perform, we need to grow, we need to improve, we need to always do better, which might be an interesting idea, but it's not by squeezing and pressing people like lemons that you'll get the best out of them. You get the best out of people when people are given the opportunity to learn. And learning has to do with accepting the notion that we're fallible. We will make mistakes. Are we ready to study them? Do we feel psychologically safe enough in order to learn from them? That's the big question. Andy, I don't know where you are because I can't see you, but I would be done. I don't know if there are questions. I don't have any other slide to show.
Great. Thank you very much,
Lorenzo. I hope it was clear.
So, well, let's give Lorenzo a round of applause, first of all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is it possible to make Lorenzo full screen, please, so that we can see him? There we go. Oh, that's much
full screen.
Oh. Beautiful. Nice to see you. Can you see us, Lorenzo?
I can see you. I can see me watching you. It's all very disconcerting.
So it's just me and you, and everyone else is just observing. Okay.
It's all good. I've never seen myself in such a big screen. I feel very important.
Me neither. I'm surrounded by Lorenzo.
That is not a good thing.
So first thing is, if you've got a question, please put up your hand, and we will have one of our microphone holders come round and ask you a question. So please just think about that, not too long, and put up your hand. I might even come to some tables and just ask whether you have a question. But in the meantime, let's get ourselves going. Tell us, why is psychological safety becoming such a popular topic at the moment, Lorenzo?
I would say psychological safety has become quite popular over the past 2 decades, at least in the scientific academic world of psychology. It has become quite popular in the past 5 to 10 years in business. In my view, it has to do with 2 things, and this is obviously just my view. The first one is things have become much more complex over the past 5-10 years for many people, which has created a higher level of sense of inadequacy, which brings a higher level of anxiety in people, which brings a heightened perception of, I need to feel safe. So we live in a world which has become increasingly complex over the past 20 years, with an incredible number of changes compared to the decades prior to the last couple of decades, and people feel a bigger need to adapt, which once again brings the notion of psychological safety as one of the most important ones. It's like we are feeling that we need to learn more than in the past. And we feel that we need to be safe in order to do that. The second one, I think it is that people over the past 2 decades, they have become much more aware of what happens with their neighbors and their neighbors' companies. So people have understood that there are companies that they truly take care of their employees. They take care of their employees' well-being. They take care of their employees' mental health. And people share that. Therefore, today, your average employee is expecting that from you as an organization. And many organizations are unprepared to provide that kind of level of care. Therefore, they are running to learn more about psychological safety. Hence, here we are.
Got it.
And maybe, yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Any questions yet? No. Oh, yes, there's a few questions at the front. So let's ask that. Just while we bring the microphone over, Lorenzo, this question just occurs to me. Do people who are joining the workforce now feel the need for more psychological safety than previous generations, do you think? Or are you saying that actually everyone needs psychological safety if we are to perform in the complex environment that we currently live in?
I don't think they feel more need for it. I think it's a need that has been articulated in the global consciousness in a better way now. If you were speaking about psychological safety 50 years ago, people wouldn't understand what you were talking about. Now we have found a name for it, which resonates with what people need. So when we find a name for something, that thing that we found a name for now exists in a much more clear way for people. So I don't believe that people feel nowadays more a need for psychological safety necessarily than in the past, but they have a name for it. They have a name for that level of discomfort that they used to feel in organizations, and they are therefore more aware of it.
Yes.
And also their expectations to get it might be bigger now.
Very clear. Thank you. So our first question, please say your name and then what organization you're with and the question, please.
Hi, Lorenzo. Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Sanella, and I'm Senior Methods Engineer in Total Energies. So I'm not a management or anything else, but I was quite curious on your topic on the safe environment, and I might have two questions in mind. One is, how is the safe environment impacted by the personality, the tradition, and the culture that people are coming from? And also, especially when changing position, especially in the management positions that we see change quite a bit and over a period of time, how do we then maintain that safe environment?
Okay. Wow. First one, the personality, cultural background, and everything that you mentioned has a huge impact on the environment. At the end of the day, the environment for human beings is influenced by the people in that environment. So personalities, individualities, I would even say, plays a huge role. The thing the trap not to fall into, which I see companies, they tend to fall into nowadays, is to try to engineer teams by personality profiling. I'm going to take this number of introverted people with this number of extroverted people, this number of people that is more strategic thinker, this number of people that is more of a tactical thinker. I'm going to mix all of them in the right proportion, and I'm going to end up having the perfect team. Many studies, including the Google one on the Aristotle project, show that that doesn't work. You can't create a fruit salad with human beings trying to match their personalities as if they were pieces of the Tetris game, because personalities is a very fluid concept. People's behaviors are unpredictable, so you can't really do that. But what you can do is to work on their relationships together, to create, to facilitate an environment where for people is possible to be themselves independent from what kind of personality they have. obviously within the boundaries and the limits of responsibility, especially in a business environment. But yeah, so I hope that answers the first question. The second one, how do you maintain a psychologically safe environment? I'm not sure I have one answer that fits for all, but one thing that I would focus on is try to understand what are the elements that brought your team, in this instance, to create a psychological safe environment. So if you have created one, how did that happen? What are the elements that allowed you now to be in that kind of an environment? And try to extrapolate these and create structures. Structures, I mean, create opportunities for the maintenance of these elements. I give you a very simple, silly example, very silly, hopefully 30 seconds. Everybody knows about my culture, the Italian culture, that for us, family is a very important aspect of our society. But not many people realize that one of the structures that keep our families together, now this is it's going to sound like a joke, is the fact that we have most of the times 2 meals per day, lunch and dinner, all together in the family around the table. Now, for some people, that might sound like a nightmare. It's twice per day the occasion to have an argument. Fine. But this is a structure that keeps the experience of belonging to a family alive. That's what I mean by structure. Obviously, the recommendation is not to do that everywhere in organizations, but that's an example of structures are opportunities to give people an experience of something. That's something that you can work on as an organization.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Lorenzo. Do we have any questions on this side of the room? No? Oh, we have. I'm not sure that's allowed, Steve, but you can definitely ask a question. So Steve Ray's got a question for you, Lorenzo, and then I'm going to do something slightly different after you've answered your question.
Hi, Steve.
Lorenzo, great presentation, thanks. I have a question around hybrid flexible working. How does that impact the development of psychological safety in structures and environments if you're spending 3 days at home and 2 days in the office remotely?
It has. We're still understanding the impact of that change in our habits a lot since the pandemic, meaning that for many people, it's a great opportunity to have a better work-life balance. And for many people, it's horrible because the physical space of being at home got invaded by work, and they didn't have the internal and family structures in place to hold the barriers while the tsunami of work was coming into our private lives. So for some people, it's great because it allows them to manage a great work-life balance. For some people, it has been horrible. Now, for the work environment, I think it has a huge impact if you as a manager don't relate to that as the actuality of today's present. Hybrid work, smart working, these are not things that we should consider as the way of the future. They are the present, and especially for younger generations, it's absurd for them not to have flexibility in their working habits as part of the package. It has a huge impact if we don't adapt to this new way of working. Technology has this way of imposing onto us the creation of new habits. Oftentimes, in the past 4 or 5 decades, we have received technological tools like this one. And it's taken us a bit of time to understand that we need to change the habits that will allow me to use this technology in a way that keeps my life healthy. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, Steve, but I do believe that we can leverage the flexibility of work the hybrid way of working to create psychological safety, if especially the older generations understand that that's a must, that's not something to resist. It's like sometimes I have parents asking me, should I buy my daughter, she's 11, she wants a cell phone. And my answer as a mother or as a father is no. You'll never get an iPhone until you're 16, 17. Yeah, difficult.
Yes, yeah. Fabulous. Thank you, Lorenzo. Now, we've got 5 minutes before we're going to move on to our next speaker, so I'm going to do something crazy.
Oh, boy.
In the spirit of generating dialogue. That's what we're here to do, okay? So I'm going to generate 150 dialogues in the next couple of minutes. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to consider what you've been hearing so far today and turn to the person next to you and share 1 minute each way. What are you finding interesting for yourself this afternoon? And what opportunities are you beginning to see in your place of work where you could start to apply some of these ideas? Okay, so what are you finding interesting for yourself? And what are some opportunities you can see that you could start applying in your organization? I'm going to ask you, so 1 minute each way. After that, I'm going to take the microphone and I'm going to start asking some questions of you directly, just for what you spoke about. But this is going to be very short and sharp, okay? Off you go. Join one of the other groups. Yes. Can this lady join your conversation? Okay, thanks. Too late. It's too late. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Have you both spoken? Have you swapped? Have you had the conversation?
What?
Have you had the conversation?
We're having a conversation. We're trying to
Great.
talk about what we heard.
Okay.
But maybe they want to talk up with the microphone, right?
I'm going to come to you. Oops. I'm just going to take the microphone, okay? How do you switch it on?
Sorry, switch it on.
Okay, thank you. Great. Okay.
He could have raised that issue with the goal. He could have raised the number.
Sorry, how do I switch it on and off? Okay, so just switch it off. Great, thank you.
Do you want me to help?
No, I'm okay. Thank you. Okay, everybody. Lorenzo, thank you for staying with us just for a moment. So please wrap up your conversation. Please just wrap up your conversation. Please just wrap up your conversation. Everybody? As I said, this is a very dangerous thing to do. Okay, so I'm going to bring the microphone to a few of you and just ask you, what are you finding interesting this afternoon so far? So let's have a look. Let's start with you, sir. Let's put that on. Just briefly, yes. What are you finding interesting so far this afternoon? And what do you start to think that you could apply?
Yeah, certainly.
Just briefly.
First of all, thanks for this event. My name is Abdulaziz Lanizi. I'm working for Wiltec as a QHSE manager. Well, I've just been spoken with my partner about the first presentation and the second one, and how we linked together. So we found that environment and body and mind, they might create a stable performance, especially if we are speaking about, the psychology. We link it by a new employee, and this is the new generation. So I think this is what we agree together.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Great. I'm going to come to this table. What are you finding interesting from this afternoon? Just briefly.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk. I'm Zanatul Ferdoz. I am a student of public health. I'm doing my master's in STU. So we talked about the mental health safety, about workplaces like my friends, they're nurses, and we can apply that mental health safety. If we talked about like, if there's a situation, if there's an incident of emergency, and if there is a leader, whoever is handling like everything going on, and if the nurses have that safety space, then they can talk about their stress, if they're like feeling down that day. If they have that space, I think they can be more productive in workplaces. And every day, whenever they think about, okay, today is a good day. Because if I have something going on in my mind, I can just freely talk about it in my workplace, whoever is in the leadership space.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And welcome all of you. It's great to have you here today. One more. What are you learning that's interesting to you? Let's go over here. Someone from this table. What are you finding interesting? No? All right. Anyone who'd be willing to share? I don't want to impose. No, I'm not getting much take-up. So with that then, oh yes, we've got one here. Yeah, please. What are you finding interesting, or what could you apply, do you think?
We were discussing the behavior from the leaders, and one of the points about psychological safety is that you should not create fear or any threats towards your environment or your employees. And we were wondering actually how we are going to deal with that, because we cannot control how people behave. It's very individual. So I think it's an interesting talk we had, but it's also like a question to the expert.
Yes, right. Well, that's a great question. We haven't got time to answer it now. But it does get you thinking about this idea, and I'm thinking for myself. I've spent a lot of my career being fearful in work, if I'm honest. And there's lots of ways you can lose a life. You can get killed. You can lose your life through ill health as a result when you leave the industry, or you can get killed in conversation every single day. And we kill each other in our conversations each day. And here's the thing that I think is quite interesting for an industry. All the time that I'm working in fear, I'm still getting paid. So you're paying me to be fearful. You're paying me to be upset. You're paying me to keep my discretionary effort to myself. And as an industry that is facing bigger and bigger and more complex challenges, I'm not sure we can afford to continue that way. And this conversation today is beginning to raise our awareness to the fact that some of us do live in fear. And we create environments of fear. And it is possible, because we've all experienced it, to create environments that encourage learning, as Lorenzo has been talking about. So there's an access into, in fact, our next speaker. So before I introduce Sophie, I'd just like to ask us all to thank Lorenzo for his insights.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And best of
Enjoy the
luck
rest of
for the new generation who we hope will arrive very soon in your family. Thank you, Lorenzo.
Cheers. Thanks.